Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our new Divan with a topic of different approaches in managing culture. Before we start, I would just like to say a few words about the concept. Divan is a platform founded by Novi Sad 2021 European Capital of Culture Foundation with the aim to establish dialogue about various topics between citizens and the relevant experts. This Divan is organized in collaboration with Culture Center Lab, and we are very thankful for this opportunity. This discussion will be moderated in English, and we invite all the participants, our audience to participate in the conversation. The first part is reserved for the presentation of our guests, and it will last around 1 hour, and then we will have around half an hour for your questions. We also got many questions in your online application, so we will also ask them. Within the topic, different approaches in managing culture, we will discuss about different experience in managing various models of sustainability and new waves in the audience building. So I'm very happy to welcome our guests, Mrs. Birgita Pešon, consultant and longtime director of European Network of Cultural Centers, Trans-Europe Hallis, and now co-director at cultural agency Olive Arte from Sweden. Mr. Milan Vračar, cultural manager, founder of the association Kultura Nova, and board member of Culture Center Lab from Novi Sad. And Mr. Goran Tomka, culturologist and lecturer at UNESCO Chair in Cultural Policy and Management, University of Arts in Belgrade. Our guest, Mrs. Pešon, she prepared a short presentation, and she was, for 15 years, she was Secretary General of DEH Network, and she was coordinating more than 90 culture centers around Europe. And also she is one of the mentors at the lab for European project making that is happening here in the Culture Center Lab. So you have really a rich experience in cultural management, in coordination of such a huge network of culture centers. So please tell us something about your experiences.
Thank you very much, and I'm really happy to be here. Can you all hear me in the back? Is it okay for you? Just before I start, who of you would sort of consider yourself to come from the independent scene? Could you just raise a hand to see if you have people from the independent scene here of some color or shape or format? Yes? Thank you. Thank you very much. Sorry? Chris, now you have to behave. I start here with this question: whose space is this? Because this network, Trans-Europe, all the people who are engaged in that, they basically started with a dream, because they were tired, fed up with the situation in their city. They thought it was too boring, or it was there was only mainstream. They wanted an alternative. They wanted a change. They didn't just complain about it, but they actually saw an opportunity. And often that opportunity came with an abandoned building, because usually you need a space. And often that has been factories that have been abandoned. And then they got organized. That's basically my whole experience, if you do it shortly. But I want to say a couple of words about this network. Let's see if I can. The network started in the early 80s in northwestern Europe, where there's a movement from the 70s and 80s of DIY and the punks and the whole alternative scene, and about empowering people to take charge of making art and culture. And it started actually in Brussels. And the guy who was leading the movement there, he heard that there seems to be things going on in Amsterdam, in Berlin. And he traveled there. They had no emails then. He traveled there and he met the people. And they thought, okay, we need to work together and we want to have the artists from your place. So they didn't say, let's start a network. They said, we need to do a festival. And they made an international festival together, a joint production in Brussels a few months later. And 30 years later, this is a big, vibrant network of 90 members and associates in 30 countries. And I can speak for hours of what happened, how it developed, but this network combines culture centers that are, all of them are initiated by civil society, by artists, by people who got together, they got organized. There are a lot of centers, culture centers that are public, run by the municipality or by the state. A lot of them do excellent work, so this is not against that. But there's something important and special when people can organize themselves freely and take an own initiative and get things going. And that is what we want to support. So being a member of this network, some of them are in the big capitals, London, Amsterdam, Paris. Some are in the Rhodope Mountains in Bulgaria. Or as in this picture, you see not quite in Dalsland in Sweden. If you haven't been there, you can go. There are not so many people there because they move out. But the artists wanted to find a space that is affordable. And they've moved into this old factory. It's quite amazing. All of these members, these culture centers in different places, the context and their situation is very different. Politically, economically. I mean, the difference between situation in Ukraine and Finland is enormous. But yet, when we meet and talk and start to do projects together, it might not, you find the inspiration in the artistic work and collaboration that you want to do. One of the really important things for the network is to exchange, to support mobility and exchange, both for artists, but also for actually people volunteering and working in the centers. And Trans-Europe has actually been the initiator of the European Voluntary Service Program that still exists today to help and support young people to go abroad and build relations. There are 2 meetings a year, and this is the backbone of being an international network. And if you're interested to meeting up with and see how other people are thinking in this sector, you come to a meeting. I think that's the best place. Sometimes people contact me and ask, I need to travel around Europe and see different places. And I said, that's very costly. Come to one meeting and the Europe comes there. You can start there. In 3 days, you can start to ask people, how do you do this? And they will generously share their experience. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to be a professional. If there's just, you have a dream and you want to do something, maybe for your community and city, and it's okay. You can start there. I know that when I go in different places, people think that you need to have all the answers or be very professional before you enter a European network. The whole point of this is to get together and support each other. You can't be perfect first, so to say. I skip a bit. I won't be too long because I'd rather have a conversation. Just a little story about, this is Stanica, means station in Slovakian. And it's in... dobro. In Žilina. And many of the people who've been in the training today, they'd also heard this story. I'm always very inspired by these young people who were 17, 18 years old. They thought, we can't all go to Bratislava, to the capital, to do something of a cultural interest. We have to organize it ourselves. They got this old train station from the Slovak railway company who didn't use it. They got a 25-year lease for very little money. And they had their parents and relatives to bargain for it. But, I mean, sometimes I'm invited to conferences and city officials ask me, okay, how do we do a creative city or quarters? And it's like, well, just provide space and then it will organically grow. Maybe it's simplified, we can discuss that, but I think it's really important. This is what they managed to turn the center into, to renovate it, and they didn't have the money. They asked people to help. Not only volunteers, like young people, but also construction companies. What do you say? We want to build this center for the community. Well, we can spare 2 carpenters for 2 days. That's how we contribute. They got the football club in Žilina to give a percentage of their tickets. I think that's a very clever way to get the whole city and the sports to talk about culture. Yeah. Well, there's so much to talk about them here. They saw the opportunity, the viaduct surrounding the center, and they thought we need a new theater. What do we have? We have a roof. Do we have money for the theater? No, but we have a lot of empty beer crates, because maybe like here, you drink a lot of beer and then you have this as a building material. And from their colleagues in Berlin, they got the idea of how to use materials that are around and to build it very cheaply. So it's done by beer crates, stray. This is how it looks like today. They're very proud. The Slovakian National Theatre have played there, performed there. I have some other examples, but maybe I just go through it. I can show some images. This is London, an artist who couldn't find affordable studio space and thought that I can maybe find train carriages instead. And he got this, I think, almost for free. Could place them on a roof in London, turn it into studio spaces, so other people, when they work together there, he built this center. This is how it looks like inside. People who worked with him came from different places in Europe. And one woman who worked with him, she went back for family reasons to Lisbon. And then after 1 year, she called him and said, we need your center, type of center, Village Underground in Lisbon. We need this, so can we do something there? Can I just use the concept and build this up? And so they did. Containers and old buses. What happened in these quarters in London? Well, it's Hackney area. After a few years, the neighbors were not other derelict buildings, but Google suddenly had their main office there. And you understand it's the same story of regeneration that always happens. But they are still there, but they had to find a way to convince the council that they are actually making a difference, because they were starting to question them. Here's just a tip. This can be really effective sometimes. Sit down and try to calculate the impact that you're doing. Collect the figures. It can never describe the actual difference you make in people's life, but this is one way if you want to get across where money talks. I think I will stop there. Here is another example from Norway, where the main point is about regeneration, where the urban planner, the city architect saw what the cultural center and the artists were doing, and when planning a new area, housing area, they integrated this as part of that housing area. And that's actually one of the really successful integration that I've seen, where you don't get the situation of just the artists moving on because they can't afford to stay there. Thank you.
From this huge experience, can you tell us what were the biggest mistakes in strategic planning, for example, or what are the best solutions, and what were the biggest problems that you know that cultural centers faced in your network?
The biggest problems they had. Okay. It's all from all the practical things around maintaining a building and stewardship things, and all what you have about teams and organizations. But I think it's the toughest is what wears organizations down. What I've seen is when it's basically corruption on political level and bargaining, and you need to liaise with the different sides, and you're never really supported for what you're doing. It can wear anyone down on long term. I see that as maybe the biggest problem. Everything else you can sort of manage in some way.
We will also talk about solutions for economic self-sustainability. But what are your first impressions about Novi Sad independent cultures, art and culture scene? Because you came a few days ago. And we will also try to assess this current situation in Serbia and Novi Sad with Milan Vračar also and Goran Tomka. Can you tell me?
I can't say anything about the independent scene. I'm meeting you tonight, and I hope to get to know it better. I really like being here. It's a great opportunity to be for such a long time in a place. And I see that having the title gives the opportunity, obviously, for the city, but also the independent actor to talk about culture and your vision for the city. How do you want that to be for you now and also for the next generation? So I see that's a great opportunity, and it seems like you're seizing that opportunity. So congratulations to that so far.
So thank you. And Milan Vračar can, as a founder of the association Kultura Nova and also board member of this culture center lab. You have also huge experience in organizing various events in the field of arts and culture, and also you're specialized in independent theater. But can you tell us a little bit about activity of the association Kultura Nova, and also about some repurposing abandoned places and some of your experiences about this?
Sure, but I would first like to welcome you all here in Culture Center Lab. I see also many colleagues here, and some of them can probably talk more than I can, because, yeah, of course, the history of the independent scene and its struggle is quite long here in Novi Sad. There were many attempts for networking, to join forces to change some things, and some of those initiatives are still going on. But of course I can mostly say about my personal experience and what we tried in order to achieve some of the things that you mentioned here in the presentation. I would just like to digress for a second and to remind you about this movie. I think it's called The Field of Dreams or something like that, where the guy is building like a baseball field in a cornfield because he has some dreams that his father will come back and so on. And there is just this one sentence that I really like: if you build it, they will come. And this culture center is attempt actually to invite the others, and that's why it's also welcoming this Divan and all the other events that we have. But I don't also want to talk too much, but I can just briefly go through some of the things we did. So almost at the very beginning of the existence of Association Kultura Nova, one of, let's say, actually the first big project was Face Festival back in 2005, where we gathered like 100 artists from around 6 different countries, and the theme of that festival was actually the city. And we tried to somehow repurpose some of the abandoned buildings, and one of those was a Turkish bath that is here nearby in Jodna Banja, Jodna Spa, Jodin. And yeah, and it was somehow love at the first sight. So we are crazy in love with abandoned buildings. That building, for instance, was really falling apart. It didn't have any electricity, water, and so we brought it there. And then it was this long-term project in Gradionica, which was, I mean, the concept of that project was to pinpoint certain spots in the city and to try to also somehow relive them with some artistic workshops and the presentations in those spaces. And that's how we did projects in many spaces. For instance, SKC Fabrika that was just opened at that time, railway station, some bicycle shop in Temerinska Street, and so on and so forth. Then parallel to that, actually, somehow there were many like initiatives that Kultura Nova was part of, and that were mostly initiated by some other organizations from the independent scene. And there was this Dizalica, ZKPKP, then at that time it was 2011, if I'm not mistaken. Number of organizations from Novi Sad, from independent scene, started this initiative for trying to, squat, let's say, military barracks, Archibald Rice here also nearby. And I think it was also brave initiative at that time, and maybe not well thought through, but that's how it turned at the end. But still, I think and I believe that something was left in the air. And yeah, so we went there. It lasted for about 2 months, and then, of course, police and military police came with the dogs and blah blah blah, and so we were kicked out. And then it is this initiative of Culture Center Lab, and I'm especially proud that it is actually initiated by young people, Luka Prstojević and Stanislav Drča, who just finished their education, I mean the faculties of art, and they found this house and said, like, do you want to do it with us? And then I said, of course, yes. So I think, I mean, of course, beside this, there are still some other independent venues, yeah, like CK, Natalie starting new culture center in Petrovaradin downtown, and so there are things going on. It's not the only one, but I think this is also a brave one, and I hope it will last for long. That was very brief, I hope.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Now we are triggering another question about independence, as it is, and about economic sustainability of independent art and culture spaces. So you hope Culture Center Lab will survive and stay independent, because many independent places are actually facing various problems connected to those topics. So I will ask Mr. Tomka, because he's actually your master thesis was focused on crowdfunding and also audience development, and also your PhD on the Faculty of Dramatic Arts. So can you tell us first, what does it mean to be independent in this contemporary world?
$1 million question. Thank you for that. No, but it is an interesting one and challenging. I'll gladly take the challenge and hope that we can share that challenge. I was quite moved by these photos and images and stories by Birgita, just because I know these stories that Milan told. But these are really interesting, and to be honest, I'm really into these kind of deserted, torn apart, ugly spaces that we transform, and so on and so on. But if we look at it from another perspective, it is quite a good analysis of what kind of place in society today anyone who wants to oppose big narratives is facing. We are basically eating from the leftovers of what power leaves us. We are waiting from the breadcrumbs to fall from the table to, feed ourselves into our bare existence. We are in the complete margins of our society, suppressed, oppressed, in all possible ways, discouraged from not only doing our work, but actually living, traced, scared, and so on and so on. And it's completely understandable that in such a world where we see what the power is like and what those who have it are doing to our lives, to our societies, to our nature, to animals, to children, to everyone, that we want to be independent from all that shit. And this is basically what for 200 years we are talking in these stories. So from the very birth of capitalism, but even before that, the whole l'art pour l'art movement in the 19th century was all about that. We don't want to be part of this money-making machine that is interested in only one thing and one thing, only, and so on and so on. But today I would like to challenge this idea of independence and what it means, and if there is a different approach to understanding our own position. And I will here really walk in the footsteps of Judith Butler and her book Precarious Life that she wrote just after 2001 in US. And in the book, she's basically saying, yes, America lost a lot of lives in 2001, and material damage and so on and so on. But what we lost, even more importantly, she says, is that we lost a great opportunity to feel one with the world, to reconnect with the world. And as she beautifully writes, much better than I will be able to represent, to grieve and to mourn with the rest of the world, to recognize that we are vulnerable, to recognize that we are dependent on others, to recognize that we are living in a world that is highly connected, yet highly, falling apart in so many ways, and that feeling this vulnerability, feeling that we are threatened, is quite a good place to be if you want to be a human being today, and if you want to be an open society today, because this is a perfect way to reconnect with the world. Because all around the world there's a lot of grieving, there's a lot of mourning, there's a lot of killing, there's a lot of disasters. And for a while, she says, we could at least feel this precarity of our life, feel that we are today alive, tomorrow we are dead. And I think that we can learn from that also in our debates about independence. For me, the question is much more important, not are you independent, but who are you dependent upon? And for me, being really a political animal, being really part of a society means recognizing that we cannot be independent, but we can depend on each other, we can depend on various positions of power, we can depend on people in other parts of the world or our neighbors, we can depend on the nature, we can depend on the animals that can kill us, and so on and so on. I'm a bit dark tonight, but I think it's really important, and I'll come to the more practical things, that we open up this question of how we depend and on whom are we dependent on. Because I think that pursuing this idea of independency is actually quite a dangerous one. Because if we analyze mostly what is promoted as independency, is actually just a different kind of dependency. And that is always a perverse thing to do. And usually what is done is like, don't depend on the state, depend on economic sustainability, for example. So depend on those who have the money. We all know who has the money. It's not the state, it's some other people. In 20 years we'll be independent from corporation that will be dependent on someone else, and so on and so on. So it's really important to be constantly aware who are we depending on. Currently, our colleague at a partner, and I we were commissioned by a really good NGO from Sarajevo in Bosnia to do a research on how we can depoliticize culture. So those organizations that are really conscious about all ways that they can depend on others and that others can depend on themselves, on them. So depending on your audience, we were talking about audience development. For me, audience development is not about strategies and tools often borrowed from marketing, often borrowed from, so being there in the social media, of course being in the social media. But for me, it is really understanding that we need this audience as bad as audiences needs us, because this is a relation. So engaging in all kind of relations with different groups, but then it means also feeling those other groups, if you want, grieving with them, being happy with them as well, but trying to feel this let's say, a common sense and feeling of what it means to be a human living today in this planet, in this world, in this city, in this country. So for me, really, I think that by shattering this idea of independency, which is completely fine, but as a really a philosophical, political experiment, by shattering this idea of independency, we can actually get into these muddy waters of our societies and really reconnect with our audiences, reconnect with potential supporters, reconnect with various ways of doing arts, doing culture, doing music, doing all sorts of things, but only and only if we leave this safe, independent position, I'm not saying economically safe, but in some symbolic way safe, and get into the real messy reality that we are living in.
Okay, so now we can continue about networking with the local society, between independent artists, between cultural workers and the audience. How does it work? What are contemporary approaches to this topic, and what would you say? Who wants?
Is it okay to respond to what you said? Because I thought it was super interesting.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Because I think you brought up some really important aspects, and I'm rather a pragmatic person, so I speak from like a practical experience on this, what you're saying. To call ourselves independent, of course, that word it has a problem, because we're all dependent on someone, and we are. I know Dragan Klajic. He approached me once and said, "You shouldn't call yourself independent. We're all dependent on each other. Maybe autonomous is a better description." I agree with what you're saying, that the most important is to ask who are we dependent on. And maybe that is the choice you have to do. Why you exist as a culture center, the purpose you have set for yourself, that will sort of define how you organized yourself and who are you existing for. Accepting public funding, you need to accept that policy that comes with that. Sometimes that policy gives you a lot of freedom, and sometimes it's extremely regulated. There's always a policy behind it. And when you accept it, it will be part of you. And I've done so much EU funding during my years. I know that it gets in your head because it's so specific, and you need to adjust all the time to that. So it requires an effort to go back to, okay, why do we exist? Why are we doing this? What is okay? You have to keep on doing that. One thing about starting as a bit of a punk and being against establishment, and we're not part of this, and we're autonomous, we're independent. If things go well, you develop and you attract more people, and you sort of grow with credibility. And it comes to a point where you need to choose that maybe it's not so simple anymore, black and white, and you need to engage with things, and you start to negotiate. And Transeuropal started really this anti and punky. And then we got actually quite a lot of EU funding. And with that comes, when you accept that, you're in the game. But for me, it comes an accountability. You can't be anti anymore. You need to go into these complex issues of society and deal with it. So there was a funding scheme that was published in the autumn that was about how do the independent scene and the cultural policy makers in the city work together? What would be the methodologies? How would they approach each other? And I was stepping out there, but I was said, if Transeuropal doesn't take this opportunity, I mean, come on, look at the call. It's a fight of 30 years to come to that situation. then you're not really taking that responsibility because you come in another power position. That's just a comment to what you were saying.
I just wanted to respond to this audience development thing. It is hugely important. I'm living off of this topic for quite a while, and that's all fine. But let me just point to some kind of contradictions of when we take these things such as audience development too simplistically. For example, a couple of months ago, again, Vishnu and I had a training for all cultural institutions in Novi Sad, 28 of them, on audience development. It was supported by European Capital of Culture. Lazar was a great organizer of that event, and so on. Went perfectly. But for me, what was most staggering is that these 28 institutions have never, ever met in a single room. And now what we are pushing them to collaborate with audiences, like open yourself to audiences. I mean, you're not open yourself to colleagues, to other institutions. Then I'm really quite supportive of what European Capital of Culture is doing as a foundation, but for another, just a simple, let's say a blind side, something that we are simply not thinking about. We're talking a lot about being open to audiences, also collaborating with, and I don't have anything against it, of course, with Timisoara, with Rijeka, with all kind of European capitals of culture. But for example, not collaborating with Belgrade, with Niš, with Zrenjanin, with Kikinda, with Pančevo, you know. So, and then in the city, we are always more easy, especially in Novi Sad, find it easily to collaborate with Amsterdam, but it's hard to collaborate with Klisa or with Novo Naselje. For me, that's really amazing, and we are lying if we are talking about being democratic just by removing some barriers to audiences, like, oh, beautiful, nice audiences, please come in, there's a, you can push your wheelchair over a thing. I'm banalizing thing, but if we really want to live in a democratic society, open society, we need to open all kind of other barriers as well, some really problematic barriers. Collaborating with, the big evil Belgrade, for example. And why don't we have people from Belgrade tonight here? That would be really nice, So these kind of things, really removing the barriers, collaborating, being, I'm not saying being in love. We can, disagree, but being together with people that we don't necessarily like, that is for me really important, because otherwise this whole myth of just being democratic by audience development, let's be honest, I love the topic, but that's a crap. I think we really need to open up all these kind of doors that are shut, and being also conscious about what kind of doors are we surrounded with and what kind of doors we need to open, because some of them are closed for really strange and weird reasons, and there's no real reason why we shouldn't open them.
So what is the strategy to involve as much citizens to participate in the creation, in conceptualization? For example, the aim of this Divan is actually this discussion and audience development in this way, that we can talk about various problems and try to solve them together. So, but I also wanted to say that people in Belgrade are now protesting because of NNK Social Center. Are you informed about this? There is a abandoned military building, so we can also talk about, connected to this repurposing of abandoned buildings, because if nobody's using them, they will just stay ruined, and there are some initiatives, so maybe Milan can tell more about this.
Yeah.
You also had some
similar
experience.
Yeah. Well, it's unfortunate, of course. It happened to them, and even faster than it happened to us, the same. And it's abandoned building, not being used for more than 10 years, and only now, when the artist and the activist came in, they remembered that they have a building, and then they have put this, tables with military property written on and so on. So, but that's the sad story about oppression, I would say, that we are living in. And I would also like to be back to what you said, that we should choose whom should we depend on. And also in your presentation, I saw those containers, for example, that reminded me on Mostar, for example, in Abrašević. They have similar to those. By that I want to say actually that most of the people on the independent scene usually know what is going on elsewhere, and at least we are trying to be quite connected. For example, when we went in Archibald Rice, this military barracks here in Novi Sad, independent culture scene of Serbia came, like, I think next week, with the support in some little money, in some they came with, if I remember correctly, with 2 buses. So quite a lot of people from Belgrade came. I'm sorry that we from Novi Sad, because we are known as living in the valley and it's all easy going for us, so we didn't organize ourselves to go and support them, but I know that some people went there. I think that bigger problem in being open is on the side of cultural institutions. And I would also like to see, I also have this experience from being in institution as well. So I'd like to see more of that kind of collaboration. I kind of agree and also in the same time disagree with Goran when he said that we should be on a board with people that we also tend not to like. I had, unfortunately or fortunately, also that experience, and I can say that I did learn. At least I learned what I shouldn't do. But it was worthwhile, I would say. And also, just one line more. When you talk about sustainability and audience development and those kind of things, I mentioned during the discussion we had before this round table here, that there were many trains in Northwest Europe that somehow we missed. I don't think that we need that we are in lack of imagination. There are many things that are really oppressing. So what we can trust on is to our audience, to our, let's say, customers, to maybe try to somehow diversify the things that we are doing and try to find for each niche certain audience. And then also to see who can help us. It can be our colleagues from independent scene. I have nothing against if somebody from the institutions would also be open to that kind of collaboration. In fact, some of the institutions, for example, in Novi Sad are, but I would like to see it more.
Okay, maybe we can ask our audience if they have some questions. We also have questions from online applications, but I would leave them maybe for the end, because connected to this story, do you have any questions?
It's partly a question. Goran, I want to thank you especially for what I thought was a brilliant presentation. If I'm not 100% in agreement, as Birgita, also with your results. My name is Chris, and I work in Timișoara with the artistic unit at Timișoara 2021. I think that there is one more definition of the independent, and that is that the independents are not in the same way prisoners of time. The independent understands that things are changing all the time. We are mobile. That's why the containers that Milan points out. That's why we take old spaces and reinvent their function, not because we think it will stay forever, but because we can use it now. There is an immediacy in the independent. the false idea that the institutions are built on is that we are building the institution and it remains forever. But you know what? It's a historical parenthesis. We're talking about a couple of hundred years maximum of something called cultural institutions, and only in those countries where there was money to publicly invest and to call it an institution. But in order to make sure that it did not become dangerous, they had to make it permanent. And by making it permanent, they keep out people who are immediate. So in one definition, one could say of the independent is that their needs are immediate and their sense of time is not imprisoned, but is not short-sighted necessarily, but constantly mutable, constantly changing. I wonder how you feel about that, Goran.
Yeah, I think that's a possible way to look at it. I definitely agree that these cultural institutions were a foundation of these national states that were being built, in the 19th century. And this whole idea that you build something that will last longer than your life, longer than your mere presence here, like a nation and so on. I'm not sure that it's it's a possible way to look at things. I just think that what my point is that whether we are going into things or out of them. And it seems to me that this whole sense of immediacy and whole sense of rush, in a way, is something that can push us towards our audiences, towards politics, towards democracy. And in that way, thank you for bringing that definition up.
My name is Branka Čutrić, from Novi Sad, from independent culture scene of Novi Sad. Also a board member of association of independent culture scene Serbia, which counts 85 NGOs from culture from all over Serbia. There are 5 or more members, Kultura Nova as well, here from Novi Sad. Yes, this issue around independence, are we really independent, especially we who are civic association in culture and artistic production, is haunting the whole association and all the people in this field for years. I think here with independent culture scene in Novi Sad, through lots of discussions based on experience and trying to define our politics, that we came to something that we could agree about in this latest wave of organizing, which started when Novi Sad was approaching the candidacy for this title of European Capital of Culture. For us, it's, in a political sense, it's distance towards the state. Doesn't mean anti-establishment, but it means keeping a distance, though we can negotiate. That means we are not organized by the state or the city or the state politics, but self-organized. And this is something that should be preserved throughout the process. Doesn't exclude negotiation with the authorities. For the better working condition of independent scene, which we are trying to struggle for here. Economically, of course, we participate in open calls. We are mostly unemployed people, overeducated, so this is the way to sustain life and work. And in this sense, economical independence for us would mean participating in distribution of public funds, also struggling for their transparency and fair concept of that. This is what we do. We position ourselves in this point at the moment to struggle for better, more transparent way of deciding on the projects of culture on a regular basis here in Novi Sad, also in Belgrade. This took more time than I wanted. Actually, I wanted to say something else. This afternoon, I'm coming from Belgrade, from the managing board meeting of this independent culture scene of Serbia, but also from the tech meeting which happens in a Cultural Center magazine, which is new member of the Trans-European Halle network. You know probably here about Cultural Center magazine very much. This is the place for the independent scene in Belgrade. What is happening there, it's Balkan Hub meeting. There is attempt of cultural centers like Reutz from Pula and the others like Magazine to connect within tech into the smaller network to support each other. From this situation comes also my question. I wanted to come here, especially since colleagues and friends are taking part in this discussion about I know what the tech is, very huge and very structured network, which I think functions well. But my question comes from this situation from which independent culture scene here in Novi Sad also started, especially with this candidacy for European Capital of Culture, concerning our working conditions, but also the very concept, the very politics and very idea of the whole project. Our main argument was that what exists, including independent culture scene, should be supported within the European Capital of Culture project. This is the first, that's the in a production sense, in a sense of working conditions, in a sense of even, public institutions. This should be the milestone of the whole project. There are lots of discussions around it. There are many new projects and many actors here in Novi Sad which cannot approach on the terms, independent terms that they think it's relevant and good. My questions comes from this position, asking about the purpose about this discussion, because we all know within the European Capital of Culture project here in Novi Sad, for example, new cultural centers are planned to be built and sustained in a different part of the city. Is your coming here and our discussion about the cultural spaces, independent cultural spaces, alternative cultural spaces, and this kind of experience comes into this idea or plan? Because what I'm trying to say, in the moment when you are here in Belgrade, your former or still colleagues are meeting in a tech member place, culture center, magazine, and there should be connection. I don't know if the organizers of European Capital of Culture know that. This is my question. What is the idea of this? Would there be any a broadening of knowledge of what is going on in the independent culture scene within this project?
No, and I can't answer for Novi Sad and the capital culture, the whole project. They have to answer that, and that the purpose and all this evening. But I think it's interesting that the Balkan Hub meeting in Belgrade now, why is that happening? And that's because Transeuropol's made a huge application to the EU to not only support its own member, but actually support the whole independent scene as much as we can. So that's thanks to European money, and it's going in there. And maybe when it's not possible on a national level, it can come from that source. And that's why I think it's really, really important for this type of European communication and networking.
I don't know, we have to ask organizers for this. Yeah. Is it a coincidence or not? But I would say it does have to do with this idea of the bid book that there should be new cultural spaces, hybrid cultural spaces, although I don't think they will be built, but rather some cultural spaces will be supported through the program. But
we as the independent scene had this problem at the very beginning of start of this procedure. for example, the concept of the European Capital of Culture here was building the new bridges. We said you need to build the zero, nulti most, zero bridge, what already exists. That's why, this is my question. If intention is to create new culture centers, would the existing experience of independent culture centers like Magazine from Belgrade or CK, I guess also Culture Center Lab here, which I don't know that much, would it be included in thinking, in planning, in realization of a new culture centers?
Well, I would also like to know that. And I agree with Goran that it is a question for the... There are some people, I mean, maybe not Lazar especially, but yeah, some people from ECOC should answer that.
That's important?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. What I can say that... Lazar, you want to reply? Yeah. So what I can say from our point and from what I know is that I heard that there is a plan that they will use some I know that there are some units and then they will be kind of like satellites to those units, and there I heard, but it is only like half of information, existing, they kind of mapped the existing initiatives that exist in the city, and then it will be somehow, so not directly really, but somehow indirectly involved, but it is still too vague to, tell you more. That's what I know. Yeah, but it should maybe... Yeah.
I also think the aim of Divan is to gain this, to establish this discussion. So we're happy to involve.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Lazar Jovano. I'm from the Foundation Novi Sad 2021. Well, the purpose of this gathering is actually to tackle this question in front of the European Capital of Culture that actually has the first aim to start with this issue through the conversation. So I see this as a goodwill to start open conversation and to continue for the second step that will be a conference in May, in 9th and 10th May, exactly with this issue that you mentioned, how to manage new culture centers. So I think that this is concrete answer to your question, because this is going to be the more open discussion together with European experts, with experts from the Belgrade. So I agree with Goran that here should be also experts from the Belgrade, and we need to enlarge this cooperation firstly with our capital and other cities. So, but this was a small-scale event, let's say, for the local tackling the question, and after that, the second step would be this national and international open discussion that will be related with how to manage new cultural spaces, as we plan to call them new art community spaces that we obligated ourselves in a so-called this bid book application. So this is the first concrete step, and after that we intend to continue those gathering through various methods. But I would like to maybe a little explore this question about independency that was tackled and independent art scene. First of all, I'm primarily an artist, I'm an actor, and I'm of course dealing with culture policy and management in culture. But I must also admit that artistic scene, artists from the Novi Sad are not involved in the independent scene association. So we must expand this issue of independent scene, how to involve artists from the Novi Sad. Most of them are not familiar with the concept of how the independent scene association functions. Most of them really do not know how to manage their self after they finish artist school or whatever. Most of them are doing on volunteering base. I mean, first of all, I consider myself as an independent artist, so this question of independence is really a good question. I was working in KPGT theater for 7 years. My director wanted to be independent for everything, from the government, from the city, from the state, from the European funds, from the everything. And then I was telling the exactly things, yes, but he wasn't independent, he was dependent on us. We were working on a volunteering base for 7 years. So that's what happened here in Novi Sad also. Many real artistic associations do not know how to manage themselves, do not know how the real association and what is for them independency. They are just working. So I will answer with concrete idea that we are working on, and I would like to discuss with the Association of Independent Scene to start the process of cultural mapping in Novi Sad, which include also artistic mapping. This should be also gathered job with city administration, because when we map that, what after that? Okay, foundation will support. And after that, is that going to be a legacy? After the title year, is city administration going to accept this issue to continue working with this question? So I think that would be a challenge for all of us, not only for foundation, not only for independent scene, not only for the city administration, but for all of us. This is something even my professional, let's say that after finishing academy, most of us left Novi Sad because of zero opportunities, because of the introvert institutions, etc. So let's use this situation to really map lot of those organizations and artists that are not involved and even do not know how to manage themselves, how to write the projects, how to get any funds. They are just working. So there's grassroots organization, many of them. So maybe this is kind of answer of your question.
Can I just join in on this legacy of European Capital of Culture? I think that's really important thing and quite a dangerous one. And I know that it's not your invention. European Commission has this huge fetish of European capitals of culture that is often promoted as the biggest, the most successful EU project in this field of culture ever, and so on and so on. But I would like to connect with what Chris brought here as a definition, that it is precisely this idea of larger than life things that will remain, years after we pass away and so on. And this is this legacy of European capital of culture. And what is a big danger is in fact that we'll be in all kinds of cities, and it happened. And in Novi Sad much less than in many other cities, that we'll try to create this glossy, new, nice, shiny, beautiful layer of culture on top of everything that we think it's rotten and not working. And these new cultures, new cultural centers and stuff, it will be nice and beautiful and so on. But what will actually happen is that it will kill all the people that are living, everyday lives here. And this is, for example, happening quite a lot in Chinese Quarter, where we already had a really independent cultural center that's been pushed away, and now there'll be a new cultural center. Why new? There was already one there, so we should support the existing ones. So I think that I know it's super hard for any European capital of culture to fight against this legacy of European capital of culture, because it would be quite an anti-ECOC thing to do. But maybe I would really advise to try to balance this new shiny thing, new beginnings, with actually supporting what is there already.
So when you say banish from the Chinese Quarter, on who do exactly? Okay.
Yeah. I would just like to go on from where you ended. On Culture Action Europe meeting, I think Chris remembered that was exactly the question that I asked to Peter Šimon. So it's always this question of like building versus people somehow in a way, and I think both should be, of course, kind of taken into consideration. And I know that you are trying to do so.
And mentioning the independent cultural centers, the concrete idea of this place is not accidentally, of course, since this is a new cultural center founded by young artists. So this was the first initiation of us to put a mapping on this place. And in the future, if we do this this methodology of cultural mapping, it should include all the, among other organizations, independent cultural centers in this process. But in this process, we also, we need also a cooperation of independent scene. We need to be invited on the gatherings. For instance, tomorrow there is a gathering in Crna Kuća, and the Foundation of European Capital of Culture is in this text line related with the topics, and nobody from the European Capital of Culture is invited to discuss about it. Well, not invited. This is not actually the way if you want a proper discussion to have. I mean, you know, I was coming on each gathering not invited. Last time I also said to Branka when it was related with mesne zajednice that I would like to come and I would like to discuss this issue since we are tackling them also, but not in a way that we see it in the media and then, okay, if we don't appear, nobody showed up there, and this is the regular critique, you know. So when you mention European Capital of Culture in your post, it is expected to be invited. For instance, we didn't tackle anyone in this Divan calling, but it was open call for all. So I think that this is a situation.
Lazar didn't place also the context of this discussion, because many of the people that are sitting here are from the Lab for European Project Making, which you mentioned in the beginning, which is about capacity building. For the Timișoara 2021, it's the power station. The problem with the independents is that the thing that holds them most together is who they are against. What they have not yet defined is what it is that they want to do, the way they want to do it together. Each one has an own strategy. Now, the institutions know that they have something together by being the institutions. The independents define themselves as being not the institutions. Well, I have a great difficulty with defining myself as what I am not.
You are.
I want, thank you. But I want to define myself as who I am and what I do and what we share. And the independent sector, if we could call it the autonomous sector, I think is a better word for it, has to develop its capacity to both negotiate, as you mentioned, or as was mentioned here by but also to define our own world. Not to define it as about being in opposition to or in relation to something. We are not relative. We are our own, we have our own purpose. And if we don't define that purpose, and if we don't defend that purpose, but instead defend our purpose to be in opposition, then we will always be crushed.
I'm Ozren from CK13. I just want to reply to Lazar's notion that we did not invite European capital culture, Novi Sad. I mean, that's not true because it is a public event. It's publicly announced, and since it's public, it's also in the public space that CK13 is, we're not obliged or whatever to directly or however communicate through emails or for whatever. But it's also not true that we didn't communicate. We did communicate in process of negotiation with city administration of culture. We also, together with you, you were also part. The capital, European capital, was also part of this process. Also was invited in all those processes, and so. Also, nobody invited me directly to this. I mean, I really don't understand.
But I just wanted to comment on this, and I think it's really important in this context, being different cultural management. And also, you have to disagree here with Milan when he said it's building against versus people. I didn't think about building versus people. I thought about new versus already existing. New ways of managing, new ways of being artists, new ways of this and that. And I think it's especially important here in ex-Yugoslavian space to be aware of what was before. I think that many of the things, and I'll be here a communist, whatever, I mean, you can hate me, but being here discussing all kind of innovative solution would be really ridiculous if it would be 75, because it would be already so passé. Like community centers, yes, we have them all around the place, in every village. Socially engaged arts, yes, most of the artists are socially engaged and so on. And I think it's really important not to fall into this trap that now with being closer to the Europe, with European Capital of Culture and so on, we're learning all these new things. Yes, maybe as individuals, and that's normal, but as a society we have been forgetting all these things for quite a while, and it's, I think, really important geopolitically and geo-emotionally to also be reminded that we had all kinds of really interesting experiences in this country, in this city, that we can learn from and that other countries can learn from. I think it's really important.
Yeah, I think this legacy is a really important question, and it came up and up again during this audience development training that is sort of expecting to bring this magic EU new ways of doing things, but it's a lot about remembering the old ways. But I think there's something really important about discussion that was going on now, and I'm an outsider to the Novi Sad, but living in Novi Sad for quite some while, so observing how different actors communicate or not communicate with each other, staying in different trenches. And I remember the time when I was really shocked by, there was a group working on the action plan for the city, following the strategy of the city, for the culture of the city of Novi Sad. And there was a proposal for the city government that deals with culture, the city office that deals with culture, to actually gather emails of all the actors that work in the cultural scene in Novi Sad and send them emails when there is a call for applications for the projects, send them announcements when there are important things going on, such as cultural forum and so on. What they were saying, well, we are posting everything on our webpage. Our webpage is public, so anyone can go to our webpage and see it. But of course, no one goes to that webpage on daily level. So it's not about whether you make it public for your own kind of surrounding. Well, it's in public space, it's in a poster somewhere. I think we have to change the ways how we are communicating if we are going to build new relations. And this doesn't concern also with, I think independent cultural scene is in its own trench, ECOC is in its own trench, trying to build new relations, but again with new actors, and then institutions are in its old trenches, yeah. And for example, what institutions are saying at the moment with the new law on, the regulation of the stopping of employment in public institutions, there will be no one until 2021 who will actually work not only their regular jobs, but work on the ECOC. But this is not something that is communicated to the foundation. So it's also about finding ways to unite and send the messages to each other, I think, and yeah, that's something that is not going on, really.
You know, the CK13 is taken as a good example in city's action plan of developing of cultural industries. Nobody asked us anything about it. They took us as a source which they don't provide anything to, you know. And I know it's about the same thing going on. Also, when we were also in the negotiation with city administration, together with European culture. They said the European culture did organize events, organize meetings with city officials, which is totally not true, which is actually very manipulative. So so I take this as a kind of getting lecture in communication. When you're in a sphere of different interests, when one interest is have a lot of power, and one manipulates with your own initiative, then it's hard to tell someone whether it should be invited or not. So that's why I said I think it's enough that we are open in terms of our space is open, our events are open, and I think you should come also tomorrow. So,
Adrian Krančić, music critic from magazine Kultura, Foundation NS 2021. I was just thinking about creative industries. Do you have some definition about it, and how that can be used for independent artists to get funds from the state? Because we have, for example, our Prime Minister of the Republic of Serbia just had a meeting in Mokrin House, and I think it's some support in that sector.
The short one, don't expect anything.
Yes?
Really, it's just a parade, really.
Oh, I don't mean for me. I think for independent artists.
Of course. I don't think that independent artists should expect anything from government based on what Prime Minister is talking about creative industries.
Uh-huh.
And I can develop this for hours and hours, but really, I mean, days after they did it, they gave 10 million euros to public company that is doing IT in Novi Sad, subsidy. No sense, private company from Germany. And basically that's the big idea. So let's get into creative industry so that we can support big companies, really. And I don't want to really hijack this discussion, but we can stay afterwards. And
thank you.
For everyone, really don't expect.
So I hope tomorrow your discussion will continue. And I also invite everybody to come to the conference Neutralno. It will be on 9th and 10th of May in Studio M. You can apply with this online application, and also probably you can ask questions in online application form. That's why I wanted to, I took a microphone, because we had many questions also from those online applications. So post-production and implementation of the independent theater projects outside of the place where it is created. We have just time for short answers.
No,
Okay.
I think it's very hard, especially in Serbia, because there is like many things, like lack of spaces, lack of like touring schemes for and so on and so forth. So, whose question was that? Is that person maybe here? If so, I would like to repeat it more, like in detail later.
I have actually also a question for Birgita. How does the culture scene of national minorities works in Sweden, and what are the programs of support, and which problems do they face? Is this person here?
I'm sorry to disappoint you. I don't have an idea. I have no clue. Maybe Chris, you know better, more close to Swedish cultural policy and so.
Thank you for coming. I think this Divan gained some new discussions that I hope will continue, and that there will be more networking and more collaborations in the future. And also, I'm again inviting people to apply for the conference Neutralno that will be actually focused on new cultural spaces, and it will be international conference. I would really like to thank our guests. I will repeat again, Mrs. Birgita Pešon. Thank you very much for coming. Mr. Goran Tomka, thank you, and Mr. Milan Vračar. And thank you, everybody.